Hi, today I want to show you how we can add dark and light mode inside of Toddle. And we're going to understand the principles of how we can use style variables to have dynamic UI theme changes. So it's very cool, and we're going to do quite some advanced stuff that, thanks to the way Toddle works, is actually pretty simple to do. So what we just start with a blank canvas here, right? And we want to create a variable. A variable is something that helps us store the data. So I can create a variable and I can call it mode, for example. And the initial value could be dark, for example, or most of the times we're going to use light. And now I just go on my div block and I can write a nice formula. So let's go to attributes here and let's add a style attribute. That way we can programmatically override the color of the component based on conditions. So we go to fx, this is where we do our formula. And now I can simply click on plus and add an if statement. Let's delete this one. And I go on the condition here and I go to mode. And I can do mode equals light. So if this is light, then I am going to do something. So I can do if the mode equals light, I can add a string in here, right? But I don't need to. I can just also automatically type it in here if I want. So let's do it like this. I can, if the mode equals light, true, then I'm going to do background color light. Actually, I can just do background white, or you could use any hex code, and then can do color, that's the text color, black. And now that should do the thing. And now I can copy this and just reverse it. I can do color black, and I can do background. Oh, actually, I can do background black and color of the text color white. So now I have this, because if it is not light, it is dark. So this is like the fallback, right? So we start with light. So we have mode equals light. If it is light is true, which it is, I'm going to set the color to black and the background color to white. And I'm going to say set if it is not true, meaning it would be dark or it would be something else, or like the default fallback, we would have white color on black background. And now this is the way how we manage it. So now let's add a heading in here, and we see that heading is black. So I can add like mode, and let's make it a little bit bigger. And I can make size 7 rem. Oh, that's a lot. 10 rem. Oh, 13 rem. Look at that. So I have my mode in here. And now I can add a button, for example. So I can add a button over this, for example. And now what I can do is I can go in here and I can just go on the button, and I can go to events, and I do on click, and I can do a condition in here. We add a condition by typing switch, and in the switch I can make a condition. In this part here where I have like this fx for the formula, I can create my condition. The condition will be based on the main value of the variable. So I just claim variable equals light. So if the variable equals light, I want to set, when I click the button, the variable to dark. So it's the opposite. It's like a switch. And I can just simply copy this and go on the plus here. And on the else, I do just the opposite. I do it white. So if I click on the button and the current variable is equals light, I will be setting it to dark. And if else, meaning it would be not white, so meaning it would be dark, I will set it to white, so it goes to the opposite. So now we have our light and dark mode. And for some reason, if I click it again, it's not working. Let's check this out. Let's see what's going on here. The variable now is saying white. And when I click it, it's going to say still white. So that is interesting. Let's look at this again. So if this equals, oh, oops. We don't set it to white, we set it to light. We have the wrong naming convention. And now it should work, as you can see here. So there was a lot of white and light, and I just got confused by the difference between the word white and light. But now it works. Just to summarize again, on that button, if I click on it, I have my switch. That is an if-else switch. And I go in the if part, if the mode light equals light, which is right now true, I will set the mode to dark. And if it is not true, meaning it would be dark or empty, if I click on it, I want to set it to the default of light. As you can see in here, it's set in here. And now this works great. Now it's not really fading in. So on the elements where I have the style attribute added, I can just simply go to transition, and I can just go to transition all enter. All enter, click out of it, and I have it as ease. And now we have a nice transition to go from light to dark mode. Now what I could do is, if I just have a theme or something, what I like doing is, if you go to the background and you go probably like to a very grayish color, and you just give this like a lower opacity. The button is still visible, but it will also be still gray. So if you work with nice gray shades, the button is visible in light mode and in dark mode without having to add logic on the button. Now, of course, you may want to zoom in, and you want to make good use of the zoom feature and just kind of like find the shade of gray. And let's just click on here to remove the hover. Kind of like find the shade of gray for the background that works for you. I think maybe we need to add a little bit more and just move it here. That looks promising. Let's look at this. Yes, so I think this button is visible in dark mode and it is visible in light mode, very light. Look at this. And now I just simply go in here, and on the button color, I want this to inherit it from the main body of the site, because right now this should be dark. So I go on the button in here, and I go to the text part, and I go on this magic icon, and I go to inherit. Now it's automatically updating this button text color based on the main text color from the body, because it is inheriting it. And since we use a nice gray theme, we don't have to worry about adding another style formula to the button. Now, if you want to work with colorful buttons, I admire that. And you can just simply do the same way with the attributes and adding the logic on there, or use a color that works great on both, both colors. Maybe like, you'll figure it out. But I like to work with opacity. Most of the times, whatever color you work with, if you lower the opacity, it works great in dark and great in light, because if you lower the opacity, the white behind it is going to intensify the color in light mode. And if you darken the and if you have the lower opacity and you have a dark color, it's going to make the color less light but more intense, so it still highlights the color. So I like working with opacity when you add buttons and elements in dark and light mode, to make sure that they just still pop and still are visible on the page like this, and still have their contrast on the page. So that is how you're going to add light and dark mode in Toddle. It's super simple, and this really shows you the principles of how you can use variables in Toddle to, make things dynamic. I could also click into the mode, double click. So if you go to the H1 in Toddle, you need to go one layer deeper to the quote element here with the text actually in it. And I could then go to FX, and I can now go on the plus, go to variables, and map it on the variable. Now this is going to say dark, and if I click the button, it should say light, and now it's moving to dark, and it's moving to light, and it's moving to dark and to light. So this is how state works, and how you can use state in Toddle to make a dark and light mode for your application. And I think it looks pretty, doesn't it look pretty cool? Look at this, light, dark, and you can for example, you could also add like some nicer transitions more, but I think the transitions are already pretty cool. It looks great. And then we can go in here, double click and do like switch, and we can even do cool stuff. Maybe I want to do switch to dark, right? I want to have conditional text in here. What I can do is I can double click on the button, I can go on formula, and I'm going to use the concatenate formula. Concatenate is taking a string, a text, and concatenate it with another one. So I could write switch to and add a space, and then I click on plus, and I click on the plus here and bind it to the variable. So now it's going to say the variable, but now it's saying switch to light. So what I want to do is I actually want to base this on an if statement. So I add an if statement in the concatenation, and I go on condition on the mode, and then I do equals. So if the mode equals light, then I'm going to say dark. And if it is else, I'm going to say, or we could even add another if statement if you want to do a double if. So I could do an if in here. So if, and this would be like an if else, right? So if the mode is light and the mode equals, so if the mode light, if the mode equals light, this is true, then I'm going to return dark. And then in the else, if this is not true, I have another if statement looking for if the mode, and then I'm at my equals dark, then I'm going to return dark. And then if this is else and if both conditions fail, I'm going to say, I'm just going to add like a minus, like no mode available or something. I could do like no mode available. Just like that, no mode available. And now you see, it says switch to dark. I click on dark. Oops. Let's go back in here. What's going on? Switch to, oh, that would need to be, if this is light, this would need to be dark. And that would need to be light. Here you go. That was a little logic error. So I have my mode in here. So if the mode equals dark, if the mode equals light, then we're going to return light. And then the mode, if the mode equals dark, which is true, then I want to return. No. I got the logic all messed up. It needs to be the opposite. So if the mode equals dark, then it needs to be light. And if the mode equals light, then it needs to be dark, because it needs to be the opposite, right? So now it is in dark, it says switch to light, and when I click on here, it has to say dark, and oh, there's a typo in there again. It says dark, and oh, it needs to be dark. Here we go. So if the mode is light, then I want to say switch to dark. And then I click on switch to dark. It wants to say switch to light, and it will be say the current mode, which is dark. So sometimes logic is a little bit freaky, but the nice thing about Toddle is it's very easy to debug because you have a visual way of looking at that, right? You go in here, double click in your formula, and you just start building that. So you have two paths from which you go. They both go with the variable. You go mode dark if it is equals light. Then if that is true, I will return dark, because if I'm on light mode, I want to switch to dark mode, and I want to say switch to dark mode when I'm on light mode. And then I go back to the variable, and I would say if this is dark, then I want to, if this is true, if this is dark, I want to return light. This is already when this condition is not met. This line of code will only be ran if this first condition is not false, because then it will evaluate the else statement, the other option, and then in here in the other option, it's going to look if then this condition here is true, meaning the mode is dark, and then it would say light. And if that is still not true, it will have a last fallback. This is how you would do an if-else statement. To be honest, I don't think that's necessary for this use case. I would just have, if the mode is light, then I would say dark, and if else, I would say light. So it's just the opposite, because this is not something that is super important where we do a lot of back-end calculation that we are for some reason doing on the front end. So just a simple logic does the thing, to be honest. But I just wanted to point out that there is the possibility to add if-else statements and kind of like nest the logic together in Toddle. But as you saw, if we start nesting logic more and more together, just like in code, things can start to get a little bit messy, and you just have to think a little bit, you have to think twice to see, okay, wait a sec. Now, if it is this, then are we sure? No, actually, okay, now we got it. So, sometimes it is better to build a little bit more immature logic just to keep it simple, because at the end of the day, simplicity is what really pays the bill. And you can always evaluate more complex things on the back end when you do data processing on there and just send like an error message back. But you have the flexibility to do this inside of Toddle, which I think is very cool. So now we have a little app where I have light, it's this light mode, and I can then switch to dark, and then I'm in dark mode, it says dark, and then I can switch to light. This is all based using formulas and variables, and if you, just try to rebuild this yourself, I think you're on a great way into mastering Toddle as a skill and, using it for your benefits. And I think it's very cool that we can turn this into a web component and that we can then embed this on any page. It's very cool. So I could add an element, right? I could add a div block to the page, and I could copy this and move it in the div block and remove, kind of like everything around here and have it in here. And this is my component, right? And I can then have my component actually copy. I gotta remove it one more. Just like that. I have this in here, and I extract this as a component, and I can then call this light dark, and then as a component I of course have it undefined because it is based on a variable, and I would then create another variable called mode that starts light, and it will automatically link back. That's the cool thing in Toddle. You can't unlink variables if you just, create that name again. The whole logic will be restored and it will still work. So Toddle is doing those things also on the back end. But now if you have this as a component, you have the benefit of clicking on here and exporting it. And you can move this into Framer, into Webflow, Squarespace, WordPress, React, Vue.js, I think it's TypeDream, yes, Angular, and everything. So I could go to HTML Online Viewer, and I can paste it in here, and you will see that component is working as a web component in here. And I could also, switch the mode manually. So what I could do using an attribute, and then we can use those attributes technically in a framework like Wiz to kind of like change what the component is doing. So I could add an attribute in here that would be mode, right? And it would start with light. And then I have my variable, and whenever an attribute changes, I'm going to set the variable for mode using the formula based on the value that is in the mode attribute. So in Toddle, if I click outside of the canvas, I have the lifecycle section. On attribute change, I listen for attribute changes, I observe the attributes, and I can set the mode variable, where this whole thing is dependent on, based on the value here that comes from the mode attribute, which is exposed on the HTML level of the element that other pages can interact with. And then I set the variable if I change this. So now if I copy this and add it to the component here, we have light, and I can switch light and dark as normally, but maybe I switch between light and dark inside of a different framework. If I, for example, would embed this on a website, right? And my website, I have the Toddle web component on my website, and I can, I can switch it in here, but my other side is still white, or my other side turns dark. My website that changes the theme can communicate with the Toddle component. So when I change this to dark, it should automatically update. For some reason it is not. That is interesting. Okay, so mode dark. Interesting. I assume that I did something wrong, but this could be the issue of maybe I want to do on load. I think I also want to do on load. I want to do the same logic on load. So if I go on attribute change, and I also go on load, and I do that, because I think the way we utilize it right now is probably reloading the frame. That should probably it. And then if I go also to variables, that should probably fix it. Let's check this out. If I go in here, and I can change the mode to dark, and it works, as you can see. So we're going to figure that out later. Now the mode is light, and here we have the mode light. Okay, so let's move back to HTML Online Viewer, put this in here, and now I can change light to dark. Oh, I got double quotes for some reason. Toddle gave me double quotes. And for some reason, it is not switching to dark, which is very interesting. Let's go back to Toddle. Let's just make sure we have the latest version. So when I change this attribute to dark, and I switch it to light, on attribute change should detect, and it should change it based on the current value. And then if this variable changes, it's based on that. I think if we tie the variable to the mode, that's what we had to do. We had to tie the variable to the mode, so it updates it. So now when I go in here and I change this to light, and then I change this to dark, I probably need to go back to the component and, just go in here and do dark. And that seems to be working. I probably have to put it in quotes. Oh, dark. Here you go. And now if I would copy that as a web component, here you go. And I think I might need to reload their page. I have it dark. Here we go. And I have it in double quotes, which doesn't work. And I need to end the quote. And now I have dark. So now if I would change this to light, and then I change this to dark, and I change this to light, and then I change this to dark, and I change this to light, you get the idea, right? And this is very cool. So I can also have my JavaScript running on my page manipulate the state of my Toddle component that is embedded on the page. So of course I can change inside my component that is on the page, and this gets probably more clear if we add some style attributes in here. So if I'm going to add style equals and I do width 50%, I would add like width 50, and let's see, style script or something like that. I'm not a CSS expert. Let's see, I would have to put this into ChatGPT. Let's see, boom, and I would go in here. Let's go to ChatGPT, and I want to make this 25 rem by 25 rem. And now let's put this in here. Make this 25 rem by 25 rem. Okay, that's how we do it. Here we go. And now I can put this in here just to illustrate that if we would put it in here, right, and we would change to dark, it would still add it on the whole page, which is very interesting. So maybe I need to do some other CSS configurations, or we would probably have to wrap this in a div block. Yes. So this is probably how we have to do this in Toddle. Wrap it in a div with that dimension. And it will do that. So we have a div with that style, and I can add it in here. Now this looks good. So what you see here, just ignore all that funkiness around the div. Oh God. As you can see here, this color is changing, right? But the side is not changing. So let's say I have this dark, right? This is now set to dark, but the side is white. I could have my component be triggered by the side using the attribute. So when my side turns into dark mode, I can have this attribute be changed to dark, and it will be dark. And when my side moves back to light mode, I can just simply change the attribute to light, and it will turn into light mode. So the elements that you have in here in Toddle are fully reactive, and they can be attributes to change its state, change its color, change the properties that they have. And this is very important. When we work with light and dark mode, this is how we want to work with it, right? Because in Toddle, we more than likely build components. So when we work with light and dark mode, now we have a component that can support this, right? So if we were to copy this button out of this component, and we would move to our home page, right? And we have our attribute here, and I would have my mode variable in here as well, and I would have my component with the attribute that we expose, and I go on formula and map the color attribute to mode, it will sync with this. This is the page, this is the component that was exported but works natively in Toddle. So when I would add the button outside of here, the logic is still applying, not just to this whole page who has this formula applied as well, but also to the component that is a separate piece of technology living inside of the page, as we already saw in the HTML example. So the way Toddle works, it's deeply reactive, and we can build exciting stuff with it, and we can manage the theme. Would you imagine that the thing around this here is a separate piece of this, around here is a separate piece of web technology than this one? And look, there is no delay. It works like it's one piece. This is how fast, how responsive, how reactive you can do the state management in Toddle. This is a different component. It is like if we would add this HTML code that we had here from ChatGPT into a Webflow website. It's the same thing. This is the holder, and we hold our components in here. And the cool thing about that is it syncs just beautifully. And you see, you would not imagine that this is a separate piece of technology, because if I would go in it, this is a separate element that we have inside of our page. And the way Toddle works with their attributes and how we can then link the attributes to variables on the page, and then also have variables and attributes and actions and lifecycle actions and even APIs inside of the components that are not exposed on our main page, so they become reusable across multiple pages and still are fully reactive with the state management, is a very unique approach. And I think it's a very unique approach when building a web application, because instead of thinking of building your web application on the whole page, you start breaking the page and potentially your project into multiple pieces, so it gets more digestible, it gets easier to maintain. And instead of having to rebuild the whole page when something breaks or when you need to make an update, you just have to go into a specific component and update it, and you have a way more maintainable solution. Now, Of course, sometimes you have to go to ChatGPT to get some extra help. Sometimes you'll get confused about the formula that you write. But I think the way they approach it at Toddle and the solutions that we get are good enough and are quite frankly very impressive, how we can make those web development approaches more accessible. Of course, it is a visual programming tool, and the word says it's programming, but it's visually. So the cool thing about Toddle is, of course, you need sometimes to figure something out. But most of the time, you're able to figure it out yourself with ChatGPT. But the benefit of just using ChatGPT to write code that you don't understand is you can look at this, and this is so important. You can double click in this component, and you can go on the div, and you can look at the formula, and you can understand it. You can say, okay, yes, I have something like a variable. This equals light, yes. And if this equals light, true, then I will do this, and else I will do this. So I can follow the code, because most of the times when we start writing code with AI, and AI can help us to make those formulas, but if we look at the AI code, we don't really know what it does because we haven't wrote it ourselves. And, we probably don't really have the time to go through the lines and kind of like figure out the logic. Toddle gives us like a node-based editor here, like Blender, that really makes it easy, even if someone else builds it for you, to at least understand what your app is doing in the way they segment this here. I think it's very cool, and it's very great to build intensive state management systems where we have multiple states across components, especially for dark and light mode. It's normally a pain if you tie it to logic, and they just make a whole great experience out of it. And it's very easy to maintain and to keep dark and light mode functionality across multiple components and pages in a modular way. So this was really like the masterclass for state management in Toddle. If you are getting started with Toddle and you want to learn more, if you're already an expert in Toddle, but sometimes you have those roadblocks that just hinder you from getting the project out there and, getting that project launched on the market. I have my office hours where we talk daily about solving those things in Toddle. And they are also great for beginners to get started with Toddle, to learn the principles, and also have a personal head start. Because if you start alone learning something, most of the times you just get stuck at simple things. Because they're not simple for you at that point. So sometimes it really helps to have a community, to have educational resources around you where you can always ask questions and have daily office hours to help, not just to motivate you, but also give you insights that would otherwise take you weeks to figure out yourself. So you can just skip some of the obstacles and just go straight, at least to the path to be better at development and to be a better visual programmer. So if you would love to learn more about that, go to nocodeprocode.com, and I would love to see you at my daily office hours and inside of the community /membership. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate that. I hope that I didn't geeked out too much on state management when it comes to light and dark mode, but I got so carried away by building it that I had to build a web component. I had to show you how it works on the HTML level. We had to debug some things, and we had to then bring that component back into our main site and just sync it all with variables. So thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate that, and I wish you a wonderful rest of your day. Take care and see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.